Hello, welcome to the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County's Curator's Corner. I'm Thorin Tritter. I'm the Museum and Programming Director at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, which is located in Glen Cove, New York. This online program is part of a series of programs I've been doing each week for the last couple of months while our building is closed to draw attention to particular objects in our collection to show the wealth of our materials. As always, before I start, let me encourage you all to pose any questions you have in the Q&A window during my talk, and I will get to them at the end of the program. Before I begin today, let me thank those of you who have made contributions to support our virtual programming. As you know, we've been running a campaign to ask for people to make $100 donations. If you haven't made a donation yet, we'd be very grateful for your support and help our online programming going forward. Okay, today, let me talk about a wedding dress. A wedding dress that was brought to America by newlyweds who managed to escape Europe just in advance of the Nazi invasion of the Netherlands. And before I talk more about this dress, let me say a special thanks to Betty Kiesing-Sparago, who not only safeguarded this dress, her mother's wedding dress, protecting it over the years, but also shared much about her story and her family's history with me and donated the dress to the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center in 2016. Her contributions of the dress and the information she shared really enriched our understanding of the challenges faced by Jews as Nazi Germany sought to overtake much of Europe. The dress, now 80 years old, fits well within the opening gallery of our museum, where we have a wall of photographs showing Jewish life in pre-war Europe. Indeed, several images in our display are wedding photos, but in no other case do we have a wedding dress that matches the photographs. Partially, this is due to the passage of time. It's rare for any type of clothing to survive for 80 or 100 years. But of course, the larger reason why those wedding dresses are so rare, and indeed why any item from pre-war Jewish families in Europe are so rare, is because of the Holocaust. The Nazis not only murdered 6 million Jews in Europe between 1933 and 1945, they also actively worked to destroy Jewish culture, confiscating property and valuables from Jews across Europe, forcing them from their homes, and dispossessing even those Jews who were not killed of almost all their possessions. Indeed, the photographs, even the photographs in our display, which show the family members of survivors and the descendants of survivors who made it to Long Island, are extremely rare. Think of the journey that each of those photographs took. Not only were these photographs something that the Jewish families decided they could take with them when they fled in advance of the Nazis or were forced from their homes and told by the Nazis that they had 20 minutes or an hour or a day to pack up anything they wanted. These photographs were then packed into burlap bags or other suitcases like the one seen here as Jews were forced to move into the Lodz ghetto, a scene repeated in essentially every city in Nazi-occupied Europe. Or they might have been packed into bags like in a scene of this kind, which shows the Jews of Holland being deported to Auschwitz. The photographs in our display also survived a range of different journeys, whether crammed into a cattle car, stowed away in some hiding spot, or perhaps, if lucky, just rushed out of Europe before their owners were forced into ghettos or concentration camps. But to have something larger than a photograph, to have a wedding dress that was owned by a Jewish family before the war, and to have it survive till today, it's really nothing short of a small miracle. And I want to speak today about the journey that this wedding dress took and how it got to America. The dress, as you saw, was the wedding dress for Elita van Tyne for her marriage to Gustav Kiesing. Elita met Gustav for the first time on her 12th birthday on September 25th, 1930, when her family moved into a new home in Amsterdam right next door to Gustav's family home. Both homes were in the center of Amsterdam on one of the most important canals in the city. the location a sign of the financial success of both families, who were members of the small upper middle class community of Jews in the city. According to family lore, Elita took notice of Gustav right away and was struck by his good looks and strong demeanor. Supposedly, she told her parents, "That's the man I'm going to marry." This was at the age of 12. 10 years later, though, she did just that. I should back up and say that the Jewish community in Amsterdam was well established by 1930, having developed initially in the end of the 1500s, when Jews who'd been kicked out of Spain and Portugal found tolerance and opportunity in the Dutch provinces. Indeed, Jewish merchants and their global connections helped propel Amsterdam and Holland into what is often referred to as the Dutch Golden Age of the 17th century. They also were able to build the impressive Portuguese Synagogue in Amsterdam in 1675, a large, notable building suggesting the acceptance of Jews in Amsterdam. Let me also add that some of that same population of Jews who were fleeing from Spanish and Portuguese colonies who settled in Amsterdam also settled in New Amsterdam, New York, and in Newport, Rhode Island. And thanks to the financial help of their Jewish connections in Amsterdam, these early American Jewish settlers were able to build the Spanish and Portuguese Synagogue in New York City in 1730 and the Toro Synagogue in Newport 33 years later in 1763. Sharif Yisrael, the congregation that established the small synagogue on Mill Lane in New York and then moved up the island of Manhattan, remains the oldest congregation in America, while the Toro Synagogue remains the oldest synagogue in the country. Both, however, had their connections that linked them back to the Jews in Amsterdam. Back in Amsterdam, the Jewish population continued to grow over the 18th and 19th century, reaching about 80,000 by 1930 and accounting for 75% of the 112,000 Jewish residents living in the Netherlands. However, the Jews remained a very small minority of the larger Dutch population around them in Holland. In Amsterdam, the center of Dutch Jewry, Jews made up about 10% of the population. But nationally, Jews were less than 2% of the total Dutch population. Elita's parents, part of the Jewish community in Amsterdam, had successfully owned and operated a hotel in the city before World War I. They sold the business in 1918, expecting to be able to retire. But when the global depression struck after the New York stock market crashed in 1929, they had to reevaluate their financial situation. So they downsized into a new home in 1930, and Elita's father opened up an enamelware business, making and selling personal household goods that were enameled. Elita's daughter, Betty, still has an enameled bowl that was specially made for her mother in the family business. As I mentioned, Elita's new home was next door to Gustav's family home. Here's a contemporary view of the two buildings. Elita's family moved into number 119. Gustav's family was living at 117. Gustav's home was both taller and wider, suggesting his family's greater wealth. Gustav's father, Abraham Kiesing, was one of the leading physicians in Amsterdam, serving both Jewish residents at the Jewish Invalid Hospital and at a private practice, but also having a private practice that catered to wealthier residents of the city, including some of the royal family. And it was that combination of patients that ended up saving his life and the life of Elita and Gustav. I mentioned that the Jewish population of the Netherlands stood at about 112,000 in 1930. In the following decades, the Jewish population surged. Many of those Jews were fleeing German rule and the Nazis. You'll recall that Hitler was named Chancellor of Germany on January 30th, 1933. He then moved to secure his power using the emergency decree issued after the Reichstag fire in February to sweep away civil rights in the name of national security. By the following August, when President Paul von Hindenburg died, Hitler took on both the Chancellor and the presidency, combining them under the title of the Führer. With his position secure, Hitler and the Nazi state began to pass a series of laws that gradually curtailed the rights of German Jews, banning them from certain professions, forcing them to sell their businesses, and eventually taking away their citizenship. Some Jews in Germany saw the growing threat from Hitler and left the country as soon as they could. Most, however, were reluctant to give up their homes, their livelihood, and the country that they considered their home. The nationwide pogrom that we refer to as Kristallnacht on November 9th and 10th of 1938 was the last straw for many. The widespread attacks on Jewish businesses, like here in Berlin, the burning of synagogues, like this one in Siegen, and the arrest of 30,000 Jewish men across the country, including these men in Baden-Baden, were all signs that Jews were no longer safe in Germany. Many of the Jews who sought to get out of Germany, both before and after Kristallnacht, sought to move to America or Palestine. But many more looked for a quicker way out and turned their eyes to neighboring countries like France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. As this image shows, around 30,000 of German refugee Jews moved to the Netherlands. And it was some of these German refugees who received medical care from Dr. Abraham Kiesing in Amsterdam. And they were not shy about sharing firsthand accounts about the dangers of Adolf Hitler and Nazi rule. So even though press reports in Holland offered a mix of information about Hitler, some warning of Nazi aggressions, others claiming that Hitler was a force for good, Dr. Kiesing heard a constant stream of far more frightening reports from his own patients. Although reluctant to leave Amsterdam and his thriving medical practice, he began to hedge his bets. And in 1934, he applied for a visa to a move to America, filling out a document much like this one. But he didn't just apply for himself. He also applied, of course, for his wife and his children, but also for his neighbors next door, who he had become very close friends with, including Benjamin, Betja, and their daughter, Elita. He didn't end up using that visa in 1934, but he reapplied in the following years, always keeping that option open. The real wake-up call for Dr. Kiesing came in 1939, when he and his wife Sarah visited the World's Fair in New York and the American Medical Association annual conference in St. Louis. Away from the German censors and from Dutch editors afraid of reprisals, Dr. Kiesing and his wife saw press reports that corroborated what he had been hearing from his patients. The news stories in America both shocked and scared Dr. Kiesing. Although he and his wife had not planned on staying in the United States and had expected to return to Amsterdam after a few weeks, the American news stories changed their minds. Dr. Kiesing began sending a barrage of telegrams to his son Gustav, instructing him to sell the family medical practice, pack up the house, and come to America. He tried to convey through hourly or daily telegrams what he was learning in America about the impending danger of a Nazi attack in Holland. Initially, Gustav thought his father had gone mad. He couldn't understand what had made his father decide that he should end his highly successful medical practice and move the family out of their home, their city, and their country. Gustav, who had completed dental school at the University of Utrecht, had been the one who had planned to potentially go to America for a short time, for a one-year fellowship at the University of Pennsylvania's dental school. But his father had never talked about moving out of Holland. Regardless of his surprise, however, Gustav followed his father's instructions, closing the practice and shipping the contents of their home to America. Dr. Kiesing also urged Gustav, who by 1939 he knew was in love with Elita, to get married right away and to use the visas to come to New York. He also urged Elita to convince her parents and the rest of her family to get out while they could. Elita's family, however, was not willing to give up on Amsterdam and their home. They felt confident that Queen Wilhelmina could protect the people of Holland, including the Jews, from Hitler's Germany. Queen Wilhelmina, of course, was the rock of the Netherlands, having served as queen since 1890. Elita's family was sure they could rely on her, and nothing Elita, Gustav, or Dr. Kiesing could say would change their minds. So on February 1st, 1940, Elita and Gustav were married in a civil ceremony captured in this photograph with Elita's parents as witnesses and with her brother Moses' children watching from right behind. After the ceremony, there were some additional photographs taken back at the house, and then a formal reception at a nearby hotel. There was not much time for a honeymoon, just enough for a couple of nights at the Amstel Hotel, but they had to focus on the work needed to pack up their lives. Then, on March 9th, 1940, a little over 1 month after the wedding, the couple boarded the SS Penland, a Holland Star Line ship that sailed from Antwerp in Belgium to New York. Gustav later told his daughter that they spent the first couple of days of the voyage in the lifeboats because they were afraid the ship was going to hit a mine in the harbor of Antwerp or out into the English Channel. Once out in the Channel, the voyage became calmer, and the newlyweds spent their time reading Daphne du Maurier's romantic novel Rebecca, trying to learn English by reading it out loud. The shipping manifest of the SS Penland shows it arrived in New York on March the 21st, 1940. The document also lists Gustav and Elita, aged 26 and 21 respectively, and further down is Gustav's sister Henrietta, along with her husband and their 6-month-old child, George. The families were met by Dr. Kiesing, and Gustav and Elita moved into a home on the Upper West Side on 73rd and West End Avenue, along with much of the contents of Gustav's family home in Amsterdam. Most of Elita's family possessions, however, except for the wedding dress, remained at number 119, where her family was still living. It was not long, however, before they learned how lucky their escape had been. On May 10th, 1940, only a little over a month after they had arrived in New York, Germany attacked Holland and Belgium as part of a sweep around the strong French fortifications of the Maginot Line. The pace of the attack was stunning. Within 4 days, the Nazis had gained control of most of the eastern half of the country. Then on May 14th, the Luftwaffe bombed Rotterdam, targeting civilian areas over defensive fortifications. Some 25,000 homes were destroyed, and the center of the city was largely razed. In the wake of the bombing, the Dutch forces surrendered, and Queen Wilhelmina fled, establishing a Dutch government in exile, initially in England, and then later relocating it to Canada. And the Netherlands was placed under German occupation and ruled by a German civilian governor, Arthur Seyss-Inquart. He initially tried to win over the Dutch, hoping they would see the benefits of embracing National Socialism. But by June of 1941, when that approach had not secured the needed support, the Nazis were not shy about turning to the use of force. For Jews, including Elita's family who had stayed behind at Building 119 on the canal, there was initially some optimism. Jews were banned from air raid defense services in June of 1940 and then removed from public positions, including in universities. But in November of 1940, there was a spark of protests at the universities of Leiden and other towns. There were no mass deportations after the invasion in May and throughout the rest of the year. So there was the sense like there was some support for the Jewish community, and the Nazis were not doing anything tremendously horrible. And one other factor gave them hope. When Germany launched an attack in early 1941 against the Jews living in one part of Amsterdam, arresting 425 Jewish men and deporting them to Mauthausen, the Communist Party of the Netherlands called for a nationwide strike. For 3 days, some 300,000 Dutch residents protested Nazi treatment and deportation of Jews. Known as the February Strike, it's considered the only mass protest organized by non-Jews in response to the deportations of Jews by the Nazis. But the protest was short-lived. On the third day of the strike, German police, using harsh treatment, put an end to all demonstrations, and the optimism faded. In the spring of 1941, the Jews of Amsterdam, including Elita's parents and brothers, were forced to move into the city's ghetto. By then, Jews had also had to register with the government, and what followed was one of the most efficient deportations of any country under Nazi rule. Relying on Dutch police and the Dutch civil service, the majority of the Dutch Jews were deported, first to a transit camp in Westerbork, and then, beginning of July of 1942, to Auschwitz and other Nazi killing centers. Of the 140,000 Jews in Holland in 1940, only 38,000 were still alive in 1945. While neighboring France had a Jewish survival rate of 78% and neighboring Belgium a survival rate of 73%, in Holland only 27% of Jews survived. Scholars have sought to explain the high death rate of Dutch Jews. One explanation may be that because the Jews of Holland were largely located in the urban center of Amsterdam, it was harder for them to find places to hide, particularly compared to Jews who lived out in the countryside in other cities or in other countries where they could get to mountains or forests to get away from the Nazis. Another factor may have been the high degree of record keeping and good organization of the Dutch government, which enabled the Nazis to quickly locate the Jews and register them. Whatever the reason, the Jews in Holland were some of the least likely to survive for any country in Western Europe. Most of Elita's family was murdered. Her parents and her brother Moses and his family were all killed by the Nazis in Sobibor. Elita's sister, who had gotten married in 1932, had then moved to Palestine. She also survived, but she and Elita represented the lucky few who had escaped before the Nazi invasion. In New York, the newlyweds Elita and Gustav, along with Elita's in-laws, quickly realized they were not going back to Amsterdam, and they embraced life in their new home. Dr. Kiesing retook his medical boards and secured a license to practice medicine in America. Gustav was able to move up his planned studies at the University of Pennsylvania and spent 2 years completing an American dental degree that allowed him to practice dentistry in the United States. Meanwhile, Elita stayed in New York, at first working as a maid for a Dutch family, and then securing a position as a secretary to the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs, who was part of the Dutch government in exile in Canada, but who operated out of an office, at least some of the time, in Rockefeller Center. In 1945, with Gustav and Elita living together again back in New York, their daughter Betty was born. And 4 years later, Betty got a younger brother, Andrew. One of the items that Betty remembers seeing after year, whether stored in the attic or some closet, was her mother's wedding dress with its elaborate beadwork and lace. Why did Elita include that item in the goods she sent from Amsterdam? It's hard to know for sure. Perhaps it was to treasure a last memory from their old home. Perhaps a reminder of one of the last times she saw her parents. Or perhaps it was because she, unlike so many of Jews elsewhere, did have the time and ability to ship some of her possessions to her new home, although most were left behind with her parents. Whatever the reason, Betty cherished the dress as much as her mother and safeguarded it after her mother passed away. In 2016, she donated it to our museum, and we are proud to keep her family's history alive. We look forward to using the dress to convey some of the history of the Holocaust to future generations. I will stop there. Thank you for watching. Of course, let me mention a few other of our upcoming programs. Tomorrow, October 1st at 6 p.m., we're holding the first of 2 programs to honor Hispanic Heritage Month. The first program will be a talk by Cristina Chavarria, a scholar from the USHMM, who will speak about the Latin American response to the Holocaust, the examples of the Dominican Republic and Mexico. Then next Wednesday, October 7th, I'll be back at 11 o'clock to do my next Curator's Corner, which will look at a photograph that we have in our galleries of the Nuremberg trials held in the wake of the war. Although the trials are well known, our photograph is a window into a more complicated history than I think most people realize. And one more to mention, our second program in honor of Hispanic Heritage Month will be a film program on Thursday, October 8th at 7:30 p.m., when we'll show a documentary about the Delano grape boycott of the 1960s, 70s, and 70s, and the work of Cesar Chavez, A post-screening discussion will be led by local community activist Nelson Melgar. You can find a full list of our programs on our website at www.hmtcli.org under the Events tab. And I hope you'll also press the Give Now button on our website and make a donation to support online programs like this. Okay, thanks very much for watching. I look forward to seeing you at some of our other programs soon, and I hope you have a pleasant day. Thanks very much.